The courtroom buzzed with an anxious energy, its air thick with anticipation. The public gallery was filled with spectators, reporters, attorneys, and those simply curious about the high-profile case unfolding before them. Today was the day that would determine the fate of Tasha Harris, a young black woman accused of a crime she swore she didn't commit. The case had captured widespread attention, not just because of the gravity of the charges, but because of the systemic issues it highlighted, issues that seemed to be woven into every corner of the justice system. Tasha stood in the defendant's box, a small figure, her hands trembling as she clutched the edges of the rail in front of her. Her eyes shifted nervously from the judge to the jury, then to the audience, trying to steady herself, but the overwhelming weight of the moment pressed heavily on her chest. She had always been the kind of woman to keep her head down, to avoid trouble. But now, facing the courtroom with all its judgment, she couldn't help but feel exposed, vulnerable. The accusations against her were unfounded, based on lies, yet they felt like an insurmountable mountain. The odds were against her, tied not just to the crime she hadn't committed, but to the prejudice that often followed her simply because of who she was. Judge Walker, a man known for his cold and indifferent demeanor, sat at the front of the courtroom, his gavel resting ominously by his side. His reputation had preceded him, rumors of his bias and disdain for those from marginalized communities were well known. As the defense attorney began speaking, outlining the case and presenting evidence that pointed to Tasha's innocence, Judge Walker barely seemed to listen. His eyes were fixed on a stack of papers in front of him, his face a mask of indifference. Occasionally he would glance up, but it was only to cast a dismissive look at Tasha or her attorney, as though the case was already decided in his mind. The tone of the courtroom was set. The defense was already fighting an uphill battle, not only against the charges, but against a judge whose bias was as clear as the thick air hanging above them. The tension in the room grew palpable, and as Tasha's defense attorney tried to make his case, it felt as though every word he spoke was being swallowed by the judge's scorn. Tasha's defense attorney, Mr. Evans, was a seasoned lawyer with years of experience in the courtroom. He had seen it all: cases of wrongful accusations, injustices that left people broken, and the frustrating battles against a biased system. But even with his expertise, he felt the weight of the room pressing down on him. As he stood to present his argument, he could feel the judge's gaze cutting through him like a blade, as though any words he spoke would be instantly dismissed. "Your Honor, the defendant, Miss Harris, is not guilty of the charges brought against her. The evidence clearly points to a mishandling of the investigation," Mr. Evans began, his voice steady, though the tension in the air was palpable. He placed a set of papers on the podium, each one representing a piece of evidence that could exonerate Tasha. "We have eyewitness testimony. We have video footage that proves Miss Harris was nowhere near the scene of the crime. She has been framed." Before he could continue, Judge Walker interrupted. "Let's not get carried away, Mr. Evans. I'm sure you'll find some way to spin this into a fairy tale, but we all know the truth." His voice was cold, dismissive. Tasha's stomach dropped as the judge's words hung in the air like a sharp slap. It was as though he had already made up his mind about her, and no amount of evidence would change that. Mr. Evans took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. He was used to difficult cases, but this felt different. It felt like he was fighting not just for Tasha's freedom, but against the very prejudice that clouded the justice system. "Your Honor, I ask you to reconsider the evidence," Mr. Evans said, his voice a little firmer this time. "We have proven that the police conducted an inadequate investigation, failing to follow basic protocols. This is not about race or socio-economic status. This is about what is right and just." Judge Walker scoffed. "Right and just? Is that what this is really about? A young woman from the wrong side of the tracks, caught up in something she clearly doesn't understand. I hardly think this is the stuff of innocence." His words dripped with disdain, as though he didn't even consider Tasha worthy of a fair trial. Tasha felt the sting of those words deep in her chest. She tried to hold her head high, to remain calm, but the judge's judgment had struck her to her core. She glanced at the faces of the jury, some of them looking uneasy, others stoically staring ahead, but it didn't matter. The judge had made it clear that no matter what evidence was presented, he had already decided who she was. As Mr. Evans tried to continue, outlining the holes in the prosecution's case, Judge Walker's comments grew louder, more pointed. "It's the same story, isn't it?" he sneered, his gaze flicking to Tasha. A young woman with a record, from a poor background, trying to pretend she's a victim of some grand conspiracy. Spare me the theatrics. The words stung like acid in Tasha's ears. Her heart raced, her hands gripped the rail in front of her so tightly that her knuckles whitened. She fought the tears that threatened to spill, feeling the heavy weight of the world pressing down on her. It wasn't just the judge's words, it was everything. The years of being overlooked, dismissed, and judged because of her race, her background, all the time she had been made to feel small, less than unworthy. It was all flooding back to her in that moment. Tasha looked down at the floor, blinking rapidly, trying to force the tears away. She couldn't cry. Not here, not in front of everyone. But the emotions swirled inside her: anger, fear, confusion. How could the judge be so certain of her guilt when she hadn't done anything wrong? How could he reduce her entire life to a stereotype and ignore the facts, the evidence, the truth? She stole a quick glance at Mr. Evans, who was now trying to counter the judge's words, his voice rising with urgency. But all Tasha could hear were the harsh words of Judge Walker echoing in her mind. She was just another nobody, in his eyes, and no amount of truth would ever change that. Her body trembled as she struggled to hold herself together. The weight of the injustice in the room was overwhelming, and for a moment, it felt like there was no way out. She had never felt so powerless in her life. As the defense continued to struggle against the overwhelming bias in the courtroom, the doors at the back of the room opened. Monica Lawson, the U.S. attorney, stepped in, her entrance commanding immediate attention. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had built a reputation for her no-nonsense approach to law and her unwavering commitment to justice. Her presence immediately shifted the energy in the room. Tall and poised, she walked with purpose, her gaze fixed on the bench, where Judge Walker still sat, his expression unreadable. Monica had seen it all: the corruption, the prejudice, the broken pieces of a justice system that was often more about power than fairness. And as she made her way to the front of the courtroom, she could feel the tension rising. This wasn't just a case of defending a woman who had been wrongfully accused. This was a moment where the system's flaws were laid bare for everyone to see, and Monica knew it was time to step in. Without hesitation, Monica rose from her seat and addressed the judge directly. Her voice rang out, clear and firm, cutting through the thick silence that had settled over the room. "Your Honor," she began, her tone steady but filled with undeniable authority, "I can no longer sit idly by and allow this trial to continue under these conditions." The entire courtroom turned to her, surprise written across every face. Even Judge Walker, who had long been dismissive of everyone in the room, looked up with a raised brow. Monica didn't flinch under his gaze. Instead, she locked eyes with him, her posture unyielding. "I've been observing this trial," she continued, her voice rising slightly, "and I must say, I am deeply concerned by your treatment of Miss Harris. This isn't a case of personal bias. This is a glaring example of the systemic racism that still plagues our courts." The words hung in the air, heavy and bold. Judge Walker's face tightened, his jaw clenching as he prepared to defend himself. But Monica wasn't done. She didn't give him the chance to interrupt. "You've dismissed her defense at every turn, belittled her testimony, and assumed her guilt solely based on her race and socio-economic background. That is not justice, Your Honor. That is prejudice." The room was silent now, each person holding their breath as Monica's words rang out. Tasha, still standing in the defendant's box, felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had been sinking under the weight of Judge Walker's scorn, but now, someone had finally spoken up. For the first time in days, she felt a spark of hope. Monica didn't stop there. She turned to the jury, her gaze sweeping across the room. "This case isn't about Miss Harris's race or her past. It's about a woman who has been wrongfully accused, caught in a system that has failed her. It's about the truth, something that is often buried under layers of bias and assumptions." She paused for a moment, letting her words settle. The jury members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some exchanging glances, others looking directly at Monica, their expressions mixed with curiosity and unease. Monica knew the stakes were high. She was challenging not just the judge, but the very foundation of the courtroom's prejudices. "You've ignored key pieces of evidence, Your Honor," Monica said, her voice now growing more impassioned. You've allowed the prosecution to cloud the truth with half-truths and innuendo. And worst of all, you've allowed Miss Harris to stand here and be treated as less than human, as if her worth is defined by the color of her skin. This is not the America we should strive for. Tasha felt her heart race as Monica spoke. Every word Monica said felt like a lifeline, like someone was finally acknowledging the injustice she had been forced to endure. She could hardly believe that someone in such a powerful position was standing up for her, calling out the very system that had tried to silence her. Monica turned her attention back to the judge, her expression fierce. "I am demanding that this court be held accountable. We can no longer tolerate this kind of behavior in our justice system. This trial must be conducted fairly, and Miss Harris deserves a fair chance, a chance that she has not been given until now." The room remained still as Monica's voice echoed in the silence. Even Judge Walker, who had been so certain of his control, seemed taken aback. His mouth tightened, but there was no denying the power of Monica's words. The courtroom, once thick with the scent of injustice, now buzzed with a new energy, a sense of possibility. Tasha's chest tightened, but for the first time it wasn't from fear. It was from a growing sense of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For the first time in the entire trial, someone had seen her, not as a statistic, not as a stereotype, but as a person deserving of dignity and fairness. As Monica returned to her seat, the courtroom seemed to exhale collectively. The judge, though still clearly displeased, didn't immediately respond. But everyone in that room knew the landscape had shifted. Monica had made her move, and the case had just taken a turn that no one had expected. Judge Walker's face flushed with anger as Monica Lawson's words echoed through the courtroom. The tension in the room reached a boiling point, the air thick with hostility. He had always prided himself on maintaining control of his courtroom, but Monica's bold intervention had rattled him to his core. The audacity of this U.S. attorney, challenging him publicly and questioning his authority, was something he would not tolerate. "Political stunt," Judge Walker sneered, leaning forward in his seat. His voice dripped with derision, aimed squarely at Monica. "Is that what this is about? A grand show for the press? Maybe you think this is some opportunity to earn a few extra headlines, but I assure you, Miss Lawson, this courtroom is not a stage for your theatrics." He slammed his gavel down with force, his eyes flashing with indignation. "This is a court of law, and I will not let you turn it into a circus." The courtroom fell silent, but Monica remained unshaken. She stood tall, her posture unwavering as she met Judge Walker's fiery gaze. "If standing up for justice is a political stunt, then I wear that label proudly," she responded calmly, her voice steady. "This is not about me. This is about ensuring that the law is applied fairly and without bias. And with all due respect, Your Honor, it's clear that this trial has been anything but fair." Tasha watched in awe as Monica continued to stand her ground, refusing to back down in the face of the judge's fury. Every word she spoke felt like a lifeline being thrown to Tasha, pulling her out of the suffocating darkness that had threatened to swallow her whole. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt seen. She felt heard. Monica's words rang with conviction. "Miss Harris may have been dealt a hand of injustice, but I refuse to let that be her fate. No one should be judged solely by the color of their skin or their background. This case has been clouded by assumptions, and it's time we take a closer look at the facts." Tasha's heart beat faster as Monica's words cut through the tension like a blade. She had always felt like an invisible woman, someone who no one cared to listen to. But here in this moment, Monica was fighting for her. Monica was fighting for the truth. For the first time, Tasha dared to believe that she might have a chance at freedom. It was a flicker of hope, small but powerful, burning bright in her chest. But just when it seemed like the battle was shifting in their favor, Monica dropped a bombshell that would change everything. "As for the so-called evidence against Miss Harris," Monica said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet fury, "I've obtained new information that has not been presented in this court." The room fell even quieter as everyone leaned in, waiting for her next words. "The police mishandled critical evidence in this case. Worse, there are indications that they may have deliberately framed Miss Harris, planting false information to secure a conviction." Tasha's stomach twisted as Monica's words sank in. Framed. Her mind raced, trying to process what Monica was saying. She had always known there was something off about the way the case had unfolded, but this was a revelation. a truth that could potentially destroy everything the prosecution had built against her. Judge Walker's face contorted with disbelief. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. His eyes darted to the defense table, then back to Monica, clearly caught off guard by this unexpected revelation. Monica wasn't done. She continued, her voice filled with the weight of the moment. I have the evidence to prove it. Statements from witnesses who were never interviewed. Forensic reports that were buried. This is not just a case of miscommunication. This is a deliberate attempt to frame an innocent woman. The courtroom buzzed with shocked murmurs. Some of the jurors exchanged glances, their faces pale with disbelief. Even the prosecution looked rattled, as though they hadn't expected this to come to light. For Tasha, the impact of Monica's words was overwhelming. She had felt like a victim for so long, but now, with this revelation, she was beginning to see the full extent of the corruption that had led to her being here in the first place. Her life had been turned upside down by a system that had failed her at every turn, but now she had the truth on her side. Tasha looked up at Monica, her eyes brimming with tears. Thank you, she whispered under her breath. She didn't know how it had happened, but somehow, against all the odds, someone had found her, had fought for her when she was too scared to fight for herself. Monica gave her a small, reassuring nod, but her focus never left the judge. Your Honor, we are requesting that the charges against Miss Harris be dismissed immediately, and that a full investigation into the mishandling of this case be conducted. Judge Walker, though visibly shaken, regained his composure. He gripped the edges of his bench, his knuckles white as he glared at Monica. The power dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically, and now, for the first time, the defense had the upper hand. The judge had no choice but to acknowledge the gravity of what Monica had just revealed. The courtroom remained in a tense silence, each person waiting for the judge to make his next move. The balance of the case had changed forever, and Tasha's heart raced with a mix of hope and anxiety. Could this really be the turning point she had been praying for? Could she finally see justice? As the weight of Monica Lawson's words hung in the air, Judge Walker's usual composure began to crack. His face, once hardened by arrogance, now showed signs of uncertainty. His eyes, which had previously darted dismissively around the room, now focused intently on the documents Monica had presented, new evidence that painted the police's actions in a disturbing light. The room was thick with tension, every person waiting for the judge's response. Judge Walker shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His gavel lay untouched before him, as if he was considering his next move carefully, though he clearly hated the idea of admitting he had been wrong. The evidence Monica had uncovered was too substantial to ignore. He had no choice but to address the reality of the case. After a long pause, he finally cleared his throat, his voice no longer as condescending as before. I will take this new information into account, he muttered, though his tone was tinged with frustration. He glanced over at the prosecution, who had remained silent during Monica's revelation, but now looked nervous at the potential implications of the new evidence. The prosecutor, a younger man, stood up, visibly shaken by the turn of events. Your Honor, this is an absolute game-changer, he said, his voice trembling. We cannot ignore this new evidence. Miss Harris deserves a fair trial. Monica stood with a calm confidence, her posture strong as she addressed the judge again. Indeed, Your Honor, she said, her words clear and firm. We are requesting an immediate retrial. There is enough reasonable doubt now, based on the mishandling of the case and the evidence that was hidden from us. Miss Harris deserves justice. She deserves a fair chance. The courtroom was buzzing with a mixture of disbelief and growing hope. The once hostile environment was slowly being replaced by an air of anticipation. People were beginning to realize that this wasn't just a case about Tasha Harris. It was a case about righting the wrongs that had been done to so many others who had been unjustly accused, ignored, and dismissed by a flawed system. The judge hesitated, clearly conflicted. He looked down at his desk, his fingers drumming on the surface, trying to maintain some semblance of authority. But Monica's words had pierced through his usual defenses, and the mounting pressure in the room was undeniable. Finally, with a resigned sigh, Judge Walker leaned forward. Given the gravity of the new evidence, I have no choice but to order a retrial, he said, his voice reluctant but resolute. The case against Miss Harris will be reassessed, and a new trial will be scheduled. The room erupted in murmurs, the tension lifting like a heavy fog. Monica's face remained calm, but her eyes shone with quiet victory. Tasha stood motionless in the defendant's box, her heart racing. The weight of the judge's decision was overwhelming, and for the first time in this long nightmare, she felt a glimmer of hope. Tasha glanced over at Monica, who offered her a small, encouraging smile. It wasn't just a victory for Monica, it was a victory for Tasha too. The attorney had fought for her, given her the chance she needed, and now Tasha wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a woman who was being heard, who was being given a fair shot at the justice she deserved. As the judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack, the courtroom's tension finally shattered, and the crowd murmured with a sense of relief. The truth was beginning to surface, and Tasha, standing there overwhelmed and exhausted, felt the first real sense of vindication in her entire ordeal. She wasn't alone anymore. With Monica's unwavering support, she had a chance. For the first time in a long while, Tasha allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future where justice was not just an abstract ideal, but a reality she could reach out and touch. The fight was far from over, but today, it felt like a victory. As the courtroom began to empty, the weight of the moment still hung heavy in the air. Tasha stood there, still in disbelief, her mind struggling to grasp what had just happened. The judge's decision to call for a retrial had come as a shock, and she felt like she was still processing the rush of emotions that surged within her. It was hard to believe that, after all this time, someone as powerful and respected as Monica Lawson had stood up for her, someone who had been dismissed and ignored by so many. Monica's intervention had changed everything. Tasha had been trapped in a system that seemed to be working against her at every turn, but in that moment, Monica had given her the strength to believe that the fight wasn't over. The feeling of gratitude that washed over her was overwhelming, and Tasha could hardly contain the tears that threatened to fall. This wasn't just a victory in court, it was a lifeline, a second chance at life. As the last of the crowd trickled out, Tasha turned to find Monica standing nearby, her face calm but with a knowing look in her eyes. Tasha's heart swelled with admiration. Monica's courage had not only given Tasha a chance to clear her name, but it had also sparked something within her. She was no longer willing to accept the injustice she had endured. She now understood the power of standing up for what was right, and she would never stop fighting for herself or for others who were voiceless in a system that often failed them. "Thank you," Tasha whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Monica smiled, her expression softening. "You're welcome, Tasha. This isn't the end, it's just the beginning." And in that moment, Tasha realized that Monica wasn't just talking about her case, it was a bigger picture. The fight for justice had to continue, and she was now a part of that larger movement. With a newfound sense of purpose, Tasha walked out of the courtroom, her head held high and her heart filled with hope. Outside the courthouse, the world felt different. The sun shone brightly, almost as if the universe itself was acknowledging the shift in Tasha's life. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. The legacy of this moment would echo far beyond her case. This was a turning point not just for Tasha, but for the many others who had suffered under the weight of a biased justice system. As more and more people began questioning the deep-rooted prejudices that had tainted the system for so long, the future seemed a little brighter. With a determined step, Tasha embraced the new beginning that lay ahead, ready to fight not just for herself, but for all those who had been silenced by a broken system. And so Tasha's story doesn't end in the courtroom. It's just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where justice isn't defined by the color of your skin, your background, or your past mistakes. With the help of Monica Lawson, a powerful ally who chose to stand up against the system's prejudice, Tasha was given a second chance at a fair trial, and more importantly, she found the courage to fight for herself and others who have been unjustly overlooked. This moment marks a turning point, not only for Tasha, but for everyone who's ever felt silenced by an unfair system. It's proof that one person's voice can make a difference, and that we all have the power to challenge injustice. If Tasha's story moved you, remember, justice is a fight we can all be a part of. Don't let your voice go unheard. Stand up, speak out, and fight for what's right. Because when we stand together, change is possible. Thank you for watching. If you believe in the power of standing up for what's right, hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories. Your voice matters.